Hello, culture makers. I'm Kelly Deals. I'm hoping you can hear me. This is my first time in a very long time doing a Facebook Live. And today we were supposed to be talking to Alana Nugent of Bebo Mia, which is this amazing intersectional feminist training agency for birth workers. It's just a brilliant, brilliant business. Unfortunately, Alana received some really distressing news this morning, and she's not able to be here. So let's pivot. The reason I had invited Alana on to speak was Alana has this really countercultural, counterintuitive understanding of the role of alcohol in our culture. And I wanted to talk to her about that. Roughly speaking, overview, Alana points to all the times in our culture where alcohol has been used as a tool of colonization and a tool of oppression, and how her sobriety journey has been a source of power, then has been reclaiming her power from those negative, oppressive influences in our culture. Now, how that fits in with what I wanted to talk about this week and next, every day I'm going live on Facebook with a variety of different people to talk about how certain things that have been used against us, and sometimes that we've internalized and beat ourselves up for and used against ourselves, can actually be sources of power. They can be hidden sources of power, and they can be turned into assets and skills. And one of the ways I think about this is, being a woman and being a sexual abuse survivor as a child has actually given me information about the way our world really works that other people without those experiences don't necessarily have access to. And so because of these marginalizations and victimizations, I actually have more sources of information and creativity available to me. I can connect dots that other people can't necessarily see, and I can help make those things visible to other people. So those things, those harms and those oppressions and those things that have been used against me, I have transformed into sources of power and sources of culture making power. And I want to talk about how that's possible for each of us. And I want to share some stories of how other people have done that too. So someone I'm thinking of in particular, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, is Glennon Doyle. So Glennon Doyle is massively famous, has written 3 books now, all of which are bestsellers. And in her last book, Untamed, she writes about being super sensitive, being empathic, being super sensitive, being able to pick up all the signals. Now, early in her life, that was seen as a problem. Glennon and her sensitivity were a problem to be managed, a problem to be fixed. And she got the message very early on in her life that it was not okay and not normal to be this sensitive, to pick up all these signals. And yet, this has been a source of power in her life. The reason that she understands women's experiences so deeply, and the reason she can see parallel experiences in the lives of other people whose lives have not been like hers, is because she's so sensitive. The reason she can write so beautifully is because she's so sensitive. And in Untamed, she writes that people who are super sensitive, like her and like her daughter, Tish, in some cultures would be regarded as prophets and sages and medicine women. And in our culture, it's a degraded quality. But actually, it's an asset and a source of power and a skill. And it's something that we should celebrate. And so I feel like each of us has things that people have made fun of us for, or treated us like we were weird or the problem for, that actually are assets. And another way I think about this is, like, I was a really bookish kid. I'm still a bookish adult. And I read everything. And I was reading Nancy Drew books when I was like in grade 1. And by the time I was in grade 4, I had a pretty extensive vocabulary, and my grade 4 teacher would call me the dictionary, and not always in like an admiring, positive way. And so instead of calling me Kelly, he called me the dictionary. So I was sort of set aside as like this strange child who knew all the meanings of all the words. Now, that's something that in a culture that doesn't value book smarts or intellectual power can be can get used against you. Like you're the weird kid, the smart kid, the nerd, the geek, whatever. So that gets used against you. But actually, it's a source of power, right? Being really well read, being able to synthesize ideas, being able to read fast, being intellectually curious is one of my assets. It's one of the reasons that I can think the way I do and write the way I do and communicate the way I do. So this is a source of power, even though it's something that was used against me and something I like kind of felt embarrassed about, that I wasn't a cool kid. I was the weird kid who liked to read. So everything that's been used against us, whether it's our social identities, whether it's marginalizations, can be turned into sources of power, which is not then to say that, oh, it's okay if people oppress us because we can turn that into a skill or an asset, because there are, as Lindo Bacon once told me, much less traumatic ways to grow, right? We don't necessarily need to be traumatized in order to develop capacities and capabilities. And there are less traumatizing ways to do that. So thanks to Lindo Bacon for figuring that out and contextualizing that for me. But one of the things I wanted to do today is figure out how we can use shame as a treasure map. So all the things that I've been embarrassed about myself, I can reframe as sources of power. So I got some professional photos done last year. And when I got them, I was kind of struck at the difference between the photos that I had got 3 years prior. And what I noticed was I had wrinkles around my eyes, and I could see signs of age in only 3 years, like really distinct signs of age. And immediately I felt a sense of shame, like I'm not as pretty as I used to be. And I'm embarrassed that I'm seeing signs of aging. And then I recontextualized that for myself. Like, why should I be ashamed of signs of age? With age comes wisdom. And so what I'm actually seeing is signs of leadership and power and wisdom. And oh, isn't it convenient that women aren't allowed to show signs of age because we're not supposed to cultivate power or leadership or wisdom? So I can reclaim that. I can say, you know what, that thing that our culture has trained me to be ashamed of is actually a hidden source of power. And that's what I wanted to do, is sort of take a look at the things we internally are ashamed of and how can we use them as treasure maps, and how can they help us, even our sort of maladaptive coping tactics, can it turn into sources of power. I wrote about this in a Sunday Love Letter a couple of weeks ago. The artist Kari Christensen in Vancouver is an incredible printmaker. Like, I do not understand how in these lino cut prints that she makes, how she plays with light and shadow in the way she does. Like, it just, I can't understand how it happens. So here's how she's become such an expert printmaker. Kari grew up in a small town in Ontario, and was a teenager in the 90s before the internet was a thing. And she was a gay kid in an environment where she didn't even know gay was a thing. She just knew that nobody was like her and something obviously had to be wrong with her. And so she coped with existing in a hostile world that said she wasn't real and feeling like something was deeply wrong with her by developing OCD. And the kind of OCD that she developed as a coping tactic is called arithmomania, which means when she enters a room or any environment she's in, she calms herself by counting and rearranging and sorting things kind of compulsively. So she'll be like rearranging the books behind your head in her head from biggest to smallest, and like sorting things and counting the number of objects or the number of people. And so like counting and sorting and really paying attention to the finest details. That's how she coped with that overwhelming sense of being wrong and that overwhelming sense of hostility from a culture who's hostile to her identity. Now, she went to become a lino cut artist. To make lino cut prints, you have to make an illustration, then you have to carve it in reverse. So everywhere that you want the paint to go through or the ink to go through, you have to cut a hole or a line. And she makes very geographic prints that are composed of nothing but dots and lines. And she has to cut thousands and thousands of tiny little dots and lines in one small piece to create that piece. Now, for someone who like me, doesn't have a lot of attention to detail or patience for that kind of thing, that's a nightmare. But for someone like Kari, who has OCD and erythromania, this is like heaven on earth. That level of attention to detail and sorting things and lines and like that kind of geographic precision is perfect for her. And so it's like heaven for her. And that is how she channeled the bias against her gay identity into, a technically maladaptive coping technique into an art process that made her exceptionally skilled. So even the things that people are going to diagnose us with can be turned into sources of power, or we can channel them into productive outcomes. So coming back to this, like, shame as a treasure map, if you look at the things that you're trying to fix about yourself or that you think are wrong with yourself, or that you think other people think are wrong with you and that you need to hide, you actually have a map to sources of power that some people don't want us to know we have, and sources of power that you might not know you have. And we can claim them and use them and feel emboldened by them rather than trying to fix things that aren't wrong with us. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to drop in things that they feel safe telling us that they are trying to fix or have been ashamed of, and maybe we can try and like recontextualize them. Oh my gosh, CV just wrote something. So Celia V. Harquail, CV Harquail, who's written a book about feminist business practices, CV wrote that she also was an early reader with a capacious vocabulary and was called the professor. And what did she do when she grew up? She became a professor. So, right, the things that get used against us can actually be sources of power. And I think we even learn this in fiction and films too, like the hero's journey kinds of films where someone has a personal characteristic that seems to be something other people don't like about them, ends up being the thing that saves the day in the crisis. So I just want to also point out that it's often very convenient for oppressive systems to make us think that there's something wrong with us, right? To sort of distract us or hide our own power from us. Because if we don't think that we have the power to do something, then we can't challenge these systems. So making us ashamed of who we are is a great way to not have to exert a lot of force into oppressing us, right? We end up internalizing these messages that something's wrong with us, so we don't use our power, so we don't access our power, or so we think this power source is actually something to be ashamed of. And like thinking back to the Glennon Doyle example, she was made to think that being super sensitive was something to be ashamed of and something to be like medicated and something to recover from and change about yourself. But in fact, it's a source of power. And sensitive people, in Glennon's words and in the words of other people in my world, and I'm thinking of a couple of people who teach this as well, sensitive people can be the canaries in the coal mine. So they can pick up the signals and tell us what's going on before the rest of us see it. And so it's very convenient that the powers that be want to dull that capacity and make us think that something's wrong with us if we're super sensitive, because we're the ones who can alert people to like, hey, the emperor has no clothes, right? So all the things that we have been made to feel ashamed of are usually very inconvenient to oppressive power structures, which then reveals how super useful they are to getting liberated. So Suki wrote something. Suki Baxter wrote, I have been told that I'm too big, physically, emotionally, mentally, too outspoken, too opinionated, too much of a know-it-all. And what does she do in her profession? She literally helps people take up space to reclaim themselves physically, mentally, and emotionally. So this thing, and I think this is especially powerful if we look at it through a gendered lens, Suki, like a woman who's being told that she's too big is a woman whose power is visible to the system and needs to be constrained. And what are most of us trained to do? Like from birth, we're trained to diet and become smaller and take up less space and be quiet and be deferential. And so, yes, this is a power that challenges power structures. And it's something that you've now turned into a way to help other people take up their space and reclaim that power. I think this is brilliant. I so appreciate this. So I love that the very thing that gets used against us, we can turn into not just a source of liberatory power, which is incredibly important, but a way to culture make and support other people in getting liberated. And it can actually be like a source of livelihood. So this is what Suki does for a living. This is what CV does for a living. This is what I do for a living. Like, I write and connect the dots and can see that something's wrong with our marketing systems. I think that our marketing systems reinforce power structures, and we're trained to become female lifestyle empowerment brands, which is to reflect and embody the power demands of an unjust culture. And so what I see when I see that is, okay, so we can make new ways to do this. And that's what then I help my clients do. So this is my livelihood as well. So the thing that's been used against you can also be your livelihood. It can be your source of power, your source of liberation. It can be how you culture make with other people. And it's like your superpower or your magic talent. The thing that's easy for you to do is the thing that you uniquely can contribute to the world. So again, that's what Glennon Doyle does too, right? Her sensitivity is what allows her to write and serve the way she does and create the livelihood that she's created. Kari Christensen as well. Kari's identity as a gay person in our culture, in a heteronormative culture, is one of the reasons she became such an extraordinary printmaker and why she can support herself as an artist. So all of the things that get used against us can be sources of information. They can be turned into skills and assets. And they can even be sources of livelihood and the unique thing that we have to offer the world. So I'm just going to look at Ishelle's perspective on this. Ishelle says she's lived with the shame of being homeless and losing homes after tragedies and feeling like she's less than for not owning a home. And she's now coming to the realization that the value on property holding is part of the problem, or the ability to sustain ourselves in right relation to the planet. It like creates the haves and the haves not. I think, Ishelle, there's actually, if you've read this book, you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. But there's a book by Silvia Federici, and now the name of it is escaping me, but it is just a landslide of a book. And it's tracing how women were turned into witches and colonization and property ownership. And so women were sort of taken out of roles of power at the same time as the commons were enclosed. And what is colonialism except for dispossessing people from their land and resources in order to make like machinery capitalism? So there is something here about owning land and oppression, and your experience allows you to see that and articulate that. So that's so incredibly valuable. And you can then like be the truth teller for the rest of us and bring that to our attention, as you just did by sharing that comment. So Rachel Holden, hi Rachel. Rachel Holden says she's been told she's too analytical and too bold, and she's now a real estate investor who analyzes deals and budgets and makes people homes and money, right? So she has turned her analytical, bold, probably risk-taking personality into her source of power in her business and the way that she culture makes and helps other people build resources. Caliban and the Witch. Thank you, CV. That is the book. Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici. I read it in like a feminist book club, and it was so amazing. It was recommended to me by Anjali Nath of Liberation Spring. She has a freedom school that is really incredible. And she recommended that book to me. And she also recommended that I slow down and read it carefully and take time to grieve and really process it. And I'm glad she did, because otherwise I'm a fast reader and I would have plowed through it. But instead I went through it carefully, like section by section, with a feminist book club where we talked about it each week and like accounted for our emotions that came up after reading it. It is a really amazing book. So I am just sort of on fire to help us see that the things that have been used against us can be sources of power. The identities that we've been shamed for when we are, let's say, women or gender nonconforming or queer or indigenous or Black or people of color, those identities actually give us information about the world that other people with more dominant identities don't have. So, like, it's, as Sonia Renee Taylor writes in her book, The Body is Not an Apology, it's as though we speak two languages, right? We're fluent in two languages. So our worldview is expanded, where everyone else is only speaking one language. So this is an asset and a source of power and a source of leadership and a source of excellence. So those things are incredibly valuable, which, again, coming back to Lindo Bacon's point, doesn't mean that it's okay for people to oppress us, because there are less traumatizing ways to grow. And we are certainly capable as a culture and communities and individuals of seeking out those paths of development without having to excuse traumatization and reckless behavior. But everything that's been used against you, everything that you've been trained that is wrong with you or that you need to fix, can be turned into a source of power. And indeed, the reason we get made to be ashamed of these things, because shame is a social relationship. No one feels shame by themselves, only because they're not meeting some kind of standard that's been imposed on them. Shame can be a treasure map, and it can lead us to sources of power that actually undermine these systems that are making us ashamed in the first place. So it's like the key that unlocks everything. So we can use them to liberate ourselves by refusing the shame and realizing, like, that's a big red arrow pointing to the place that our power is buried, and somebody doesn't want us to use it, right? So it's a source of liberation. It's a source of culture making, because when we resist that shaming and we use that power and we claim that power and we share that power, now we are creating a whole new outcome and a whole new way to socialize each other. And it can be a source of livelihood too, because it's the thing that you uniquely, easily have access to. And that now is like the skill you can offer in the world. So that's what I wanted to bring forward today. And every day this week, I'll be talking to people roughly around 10:15. I'll put up a schedule, or you can sign up to my newsletter and I'll send reminders every day. And those are the things I want to talk to. So I'm going to talk to Toy Smith about motherhood and single motherhood, because there's this narrative that says being a mother or being a single mother is an impediment to your career. But both Toy and I have had the experience of being a mother is actually a form of leadership, and it gets you razor focused on the things that are important to you that you need to accomplish in limited amounts of time. And the bias and the stigma against motherhood, and in particular against single motherhood, and in Toy's case, against Black single motherhood, is again another source of information. You see the world and the power structures more clearly than other people. So now you again have that additional source of information that you can use to liberate yourself and, collaborate with other people to liberate us more generally. So I'm going to talk to Toy about that. Alana and I are going to reschedule our talk about alcohol and how alcohol has been used to disempower people, and what sobriety and our relationship with alcohol or not drinking alcohol can tell us about culture and power. And I'm going to be talking to Rue Johnson. Rue is a powerhouse. She has worked with, artists like 50 Cent, and she coordinates a cannabis festival in Washington, and she puts on just big, massive, culturally iconic events. This is what she does. And she told me that traveling in those environments and not being conventionally attractive, so being like a fat, Black, dark-skinned woman in these environments, has actually been a career asset, because it makes people not sexualize her and they take her seriously. And that's been an asset in her career. And so she's leveraged it in that way. So I'm going to be talking to people like that about how there are unexpected sources of power in their life and how things that have been used against them, they can turn into superpowers, assets, skills, sources of competence and excellence. So I'm so excited to be doing this over the next week or two. And I hope that you will, tune in and also share your experiences. And if you want to talk about your story and like something that you discovered as a source of power, an unexpected source of power, I would love to hear it. My email is info@kellydeals.com. Feel free to send it to me. Let me know if I can use your name or not. If you just want to anonymize it, I can do that. But if you want to use your name, then I could do that as well. I'd love to hear your stories. So thanks for being here today. I hope you will show up tomorrow at 10:15 where we continue this conversation about how everything that's been used against you can be a source of power. Those sources of power are sometimes deliberately hidden or shamed because they undermine structures of oppression. And we can use shame as a treasure map. I often think of like things I'm ashamed of as like a big red arrow pointing to where the power actually is. So I'm going to go use it, and I hope you will too. Thanks for being here today.